There's low-hanging fruit, and that is the economy of displaced people. For decades, discussions around displacement here in Africa have largely centered on crisis, response humanitarian aid, as well as emergency relief. Images of refugee camps and vulnerable populations having shaped the public perceptions that we have as a people of Africa, and this often reducing the displaced people to recipients of assistance rather than contributors to economic growth. But with a new report by Amahoro Coalition, it is challenging this narrative, with the report estimating that Africa's 43 million displaced people, including refugees and internally displaced people, generate approximately $27 billion US, and this is in annual income. That's an economy comparable to the GDP of entire nations. Now, according to this report, displaced communities are running businesses, they are creating jobs, they're into farming and trading across borders, and are increasing contribution to local economies. Yet, despite this economic activity, they are remaining largely overlooked by mainstream investors, financial institutions, as well as policy makers. So this morning, we are asking ourselves, are we looking at the displacement through the wrong lenses? And is Africa sitting on an overlooked economic opportunity? Joining me for these conversations on Zoom, I'm being joined by Tito Mbati, who's a strategic custodian for partnerships. This is Amahoro Coalition, whose work is focusing on building partnership between displaced communities, investors, financial institutions, as well as policy makers. Tito, you're most welcome. Good morning to you.
Hi. Good morning. Good morning. How are you doing today?
Very well. We are also having Mercy Kusiwa joining us on Zoom. Mercy is the strategy custodian for communications at the Amahoro Coalition, and she's leading efforts to reshape the global conversations. And this is around displacement and economic inclusion. Good morning to you, Mercy.
Good morning.
Friends, my name is Priscilla Regina, and I'll be taking you through the conversation this morning. As we unpack it, the report is estimating that displaced populations are generating $27 billion US, and this is on an annual basis. Mercy, could you walk us through how these figures are actually calculated and why policymakers need to take serious note of these figures?
I believe you posed the question to Mercy, but I might just take it over from her.
Okay, Tito.
I think, so these figures are calculated by looking at studies across Africa, which measure the annual consumption patterns, earning patterns of these displaced populations, which are refugees and IDPs across the continent. And so it's the first study that's really trying to extrapolate and project what these numbers are. And how we can, and what we can do with such a large population. And so, you know, when we talk about 27 billion, it's quite a large number, right? It's quite massive, and people might find it hard to believe. But when you look at the GNI per capita of the roughly 45 million people, it comes to less than $600 a year in earnings per person. And so, on a per person basis, it's still far lower than the average across most African countries. However, when you have such a large group and such concentrated populations, it then means that the consumption potential or the business potential in these areas is quite significant. And that's something that's been consistently overlooked.
Okay. Now, speaking of overlooking, let's talk about the recognition gap. If this economic activity has actually been existing for years as a low-hanging fruit, why is it that we see governments or banks or even development financiers failing to recognize the displaced communities as an economically viable market?
It's a great question you pose, and I think it's the same way that most markets are overlooked. Unless you've seen it for yourself, it's kind of hard to believe. There's a lot of stigma associated with refugees, typically. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the concept. But, you know, these are doctors, these are lawyers, engineers who have been forced from their homes due to violence or other catastrophes. And so it's natural for them to be overlooked because there's a lack of understanding about what these populations are and their potential. the narrative is typically one of pain and one of maybe fear, even for some people, instead of one of opportunity. And so our goal at Amahoro is to switch that narrative and to highlight the opportunity that there is.
All right, speaking of highlighting opportunities, Mercy?
What Tito has said is that for far too long, displacement has only been seen as a humanitarian issue. So most solutions are focused on aid rather than economic participation. And so for us at Amahoro, what we do is that we shift the conversation from how do we help refugees to how do we grow, for instance, an agricultural economy that includes them. And so that shift then naturally removes the barrier that it's not that there is a lack of economic activity, it's just that it's been a lack of economic mindset. And that is what we are drawing the attention of the private sector to.
Okay, speaking of mindset, how difficult has it been to actually convince people that these are not just displaced populations, but they are an economic opportunity?
So it hasn't really been difficult. The challenge we have seen is that people do not know. And so you cannot be punished for what you do not know, right? And once we draw the attention of the people to what the opportunities are, I will cite an example. The Jaleka camp, refugee camp in Malawi, was built for 12,000 people. As of 2026, we have about 56,000 people who are occupying that camp. As a business leader who has never thought about that as a market size, it's not something that is top of my mind. But once we draw people attention to it, once we draw banks attention, private sector attention to that economic potential, there is always that shift. So businesses are ready to hire people who have the right talent to fill the roles because they have the skills, not just because they are refugees.
Okay. What has surprised you most from the people who have been able to interact with this report? What have been some of the reactions from different stakeholders, government entities, it could be donors, the wider financial markets? What's been that surprising reaction?
I think what has surprised us most is the opportunity, the amount of opportunity and also resilience that these people exhibit. So for instance, we have the Amahoro Coalition runs a fellowship program, and just last Saturday, which was World Refugee Day, we onboarded a set of 41 fellows to join the fellowship program. And now in its cohort 4, we have 129 fellows. And what we have seen is that these fellows, prior to joining the fellowship, were employing about 400 people. 2 years into the fellowship, that number has quadrupled. We are seeing about 2,500 people who are earning, who are working dignified jobs, because these are jobs that have been started by people who have experienced displacement. And so for us, the shock really is that though market systems do not exist for them, when we open the ecosystem to make it viable for them, they are creating jobs, they are building sustainable businesses. They are able to attract much more capital because they have the necessary documentation that are required.
Okay. Mercy, in conclusion, as a communication strategist, what is the role of communication and media in actually bridging the gap between this economic opportunity and where the economics are to empower these communities?
I think our work as comms people and media people is to help people discover. So we take the cover off what exists. And so for me, my work is really to bring these reports to the doorsteps of the private sector, to the doorsteps of the international agencies who are working with us in the refugee space, to say beyond the aid, because aid is important. When people are displaced and they are forced to flee, some of the most immediate things are the shelter, are the food. But beyond that, beyond the first 3-4 months of providing that, the conversation should shift to what is the potential of these people? What are their skills? We have examples of doctors who have been displaced from Sudan who are now based in Kenya. No African country has enough doctors, but these doctors who are displaced in Kenya are not able to work because of documentation issues. And so our work with different stakeholder groups is really to ensure ensure that the barriers that exist today, we are able to take them off and make the system as easy and possible for people who run away without documentation. As much as they are Africans, we are able to accept them, the skills they have, the talents they have, and then integrate them fully into our economic zones.
All right, thank you so much, Mercy Kusiwa, Strategy Custodian Communication. This is with Maharo Coalition. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you too. Thank you for having us.
All right, so back to Tito. Tito, I believe you're still with us. I want us to talk about financial inclusion, and this is based on the report, because in there I see it notes that loan repayment rates are exceeding 95%, and this is among the displaced borrowers. Now, from where I'm standing, these are numbers that banks could actually envy right now. What explains this performance, and why has mainstream financial institutions remained hesitant?
Hi, Priscilla, let me take that. So what we are seeing, we have seen the 97% repayment rate of loans from displaced communities. And as part of the report, we looked at different case studies. And one of the case studies we looked at is our partner organization in Komoko, which gives funds to small businesses. And they have the data that shows that there are 97%. Now, what stops banks from lending to people who have experienced displacement is that usually these people do not have documentation. So as a small business owner, to be able to access a loan, you have to have a business registration certificate, you have to have some sort of tax certificate, you have to have some sort of collateral, right? But if you look at the different countries, there are different documentation requirements that are not accessible for these people to access. And so because there is that lack of access, then the banks would definitely shy away, because you cannot meet the KYC requirements to be able to access the loans. That is what has been the barrier, and that is what we are working with partners to fix.
Okay, so Marcy, as we conclude for the case of Ghana, where you are this morning, investment opportunities, which ones are those that different countries across Africa can actually rethink?
So investment opportunities, the first one I will cite is agric, because we know that agriculture employs the highest number of people on the continent, and we have to feed ourselves, right? And the first solution that you solve in a place of conflict is when people have food, naturally some of the conflicts and challenges that they have are resolved naturally. And so we are doing a lot of work in West Africa, in Nigeria, for instance, in agric. In Uganda, we are doing a lot of work in agric, just the low-hanging fruits of what naturally exists. One of the things we are doing in Nigeria is with the Bank of Agriculture in Nigeria, we are working to integrate 200,000 displaced farmers. A little over a month ago, we signed an agreement with another partner, Sebora Farms. We know in northern Nigeria, they do a lot of dairy and milk, and Sebora is in the milk agency. And what we are doing is that displaced farmers, both women and men who are engaged in cattle farming, we are off-taking the milk right from source and giving these people monies that originally they wouldn't have been able to earn. So that is what we are doing. There are different interventions, but I think that the lowest hanging fruit is in agriculture.
All right, thank you so much, Mercy, for joining us all the way from Ghana, as well as Tito all the way from Nairobi, from Mahoro Coalition, that is really reshaping the narrative that we have been seeing around displaced persons, to seeing them as economically viable people that can contribute. After all, a $27 billion contribution to economies is a big number that is worth double-checking by different other sectors to see how they can tap into this potential. That brings us to the end of that conversation, but we also do get to look at another conversation from the region with one of our regional reporters, Julius Uchen, who's bringing you cooking oil crisis for dealers in the Teso sub-region. Julius, good morning to you.
Hello, good morning, viewers. I'm Julius Uchen coming live from Lira City. Right now, I'm standing at Mayor's Garden here in the city. And this morning, we are looking at the cooking oil crisis for dealers in Lamu sub-region. And the impact is that the oilseed processors are withdrawing from the business. And this morning, I'm joined in by Mr. Fred Doy, chairperson of Chamber of Commerce, Lira branch, and he's also the regional manager, Uganda Oilseed Processors Association. Good morning.
Good
Fred.
morning, sir.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Take us through.
I'm Doy Frederick. I'm the chairman Chamber of Commerce for Lira. I also represent Uganda Oilseed Producers and Processors Association as the regional manager, where, Lira is an industrial city. It is commercial and industrial, and the industries have all come about the sunflower production. Sunflower production has steadily been growing in Lira, in Lango, in the whole of northern Uganda. But of late, we are noting quite a number of challenges which are facing the processors. Leave alone the seed problem, which the bulk of the seed is imported in the country, and you cannot rely on economy on imported seed. But the major challenge today is how palm oil is undercutting sunflower production. Those who are importing palm oil from Indonesia and Malaysia are landing the product in lira at 4,000 shillings per liter. And this one undercuts production and processing of sunflower locally in lira here. This one has culminated into the local processors, the medium and small scale processors, who are now withdrawing from the business because they cannot now compete. You can imagine being forced to sell your sunflower because of a certain commodity which has come very cheaply. And what we have realized, we interacted with the Uganda Revenue Authority. At one time, we had negotiated and pushed the tax on palm oil to 35%, but we don't know what happened. Later on, it was reduced to 15%. And at 15%, that therefore means palm oil is now the cheapest oil available in Uganda and in Laos in particular. And this one is affecting local production because the off-takers are now withdrawing. The small and medium scale local investors from Lango region, from Teso, from Choli, they are withdrawing from the business. We have seen a number of them either renting out their premises to other foreign, mostly Indians and Pakistani, simply because we don't know where they get their source of funding from. But in Uganda here, our processors cannot compete with the Indian processors because of the differences in the sources of finances. I believe in some other countries the interest rate on loans are cheap enough and can trigger in a lot more demand and production of some of these commodities. What is the bottom line here is there is no way a processor can withstand pressure in the industry when he's buying sunflower from the farmers, and it will therefore force him to buy sunflower cheaply. And the moment sunflower is bought cheaply, farmers withdraw from production of the crop. And this one resonate into a number of farmers losing means of income. As Chamber of Commerce, we are trying to talk to the authorities so that we take back the tax on palm oil to at least 30 or 25%. But at 15%, we have seen is not working. And besides that one, there is also double taxation. There is local service tax, which is at 200 shillings per liter. But from July, it is going to go to 400 shillings per liter. This one culminates into high cost of the cooking oil, and yet at the same time, palm oil that lands in will be favored because it lands at 4,000. That means the environment is not fair for each and everybody. So our concern as Chamber of Commerce, we are appealing to the authorities to come round and see how these challenges can be addressed so that our local processors will go back to their production. And when this thing happens like this, it affects the rural population because they will withdraw from the crop, and yet the crop is one of the easiest crops to be grown and for farmers to gain money for paying school fees, for addressing their basic needs. And the moment they withdraw, that means cooking oil prices will be a constant. And this one we have seen it is already affecting the population. Quite a number of them have jumped to other businesses, and it is actually quite pathetic. We have also talked to the foreign investors, the Indian investors. No? What they have now done, they have formed an association so that they can come and plead the government so that the government leaves. So as Chamber of Commerce, we cannot sit when the businesses are being affected, and yet we're supposed to protect and grow businesses for members. And the moment the members are not satisfied with our services, that means this is an indictment in the face of Chamber of Commerce. Oh. That's why we are very much concerned. Thank you.